Welcome to this video, which is going to show you how to block a traditional hat in Harris tweed. First of all, we will take our button block. Now this is quite a small hat block and these cost around about £50. Then we have a piece of millinery buckram, which is a stiffened cotton fabric, highly stiffened, woven. And then I have a piece of Harris tweed wool, and also we will need a piece of petersham to match and some hat elastic. And last but not least, a small square of acrylic felt and some feathers or whatever you are deciding to decorate your hat with. So let's make a start. We're going to start with the buckram first, and as I say, it's heavily stiffened. And we need to cut a large circle around the button, at least 2 inches bigger than the button shape itself, because we will be stretching it over and pinning it. Now it doesn't have to be a perfect circle, it's just a rough guide, because we'll be stretching and pulling and it won't end up looking much like a circle in the end anyway. Always cut off any salve edge. So there's our buckram ready cut. And now we're going to cut our Harris tweed. And I'm going to use the buckram as my pattern piece. And again, just a rough shape. It doesn't have to be exact or very neat because it's going to be trimmed afterwards. Now you don't have to make the hat in Harris tweed, you could use another suiting fabric, anything you like really. So we have everything ready. We're also going to cut a circle out of the felt. Now this will be the actual size of the button, so use a pencil or a pen, draw a circle and cut it out. That will be for the lining. Now I've got to wet both the buckram and the Harris tweed. So I'm spraying with clean, fresh water and I'm waiting for the buckram to absorb it so that it gets soft enough for me to pull it and stretch it over the block. So spray quite well. It doesn't have to be absolutely dripping, but it has to be quite wet. And then spray your fabric. We want this to be damp enough to stretch. This is why wool is quite nice. It doesn't soak the moisture up too much, being wool, but it does give it a little bit of leeway. I'm also putting a tiny bit of hat stiffener on the fabric, PVA hat stiffener, and then I'm rubbing it into the fabric to get it into the fibres. So has it got stretchy enough? Probably not. A little bit more water perhaps needed. Almost there, but not quite. This is why it's no good using fusible buckram, the type that you use for curtain pelmets, etc., because you can't stretch it. It's got no leeway to it. Now the button block has been covered in cling film or saran wrap so that it stops everything from sticking too badly. So I'm going to lay my Harris tweed down, then my buckram and then my block, and we're going to pin. Now I like to use what are called T-pins or wig pins. This is because they're coated, they're nickel coated, which means they don't rust. Normal blocking pins and other pins that you use will rust with the water, and I don't want rust marks in my buckram or my fabric, so I tend to use T-pins or wig pins. First of all, do all 4 points of the compass. Pull and stretch the buckram over the block, and then the fabric, and pop a pin in. So east and west, and then north and south. pulling the buckram quite a lot. You do have to stretch it because we don't want any pleats or folds in the buckram or the fabric when we've finished. So good pulling and stretching. You need muscles for this. So once you've done west, east, north, south, then carry on with the rest of it. Pulling, stretching, making sure all the wrinkles are out, adding as many pins as possible so that you don't have any material flapping about and not pressed into the curves. Now obviously it would depend what type of block you've got as to how well you can pin to it. Some blocks you might have a groove so that you can use string around it, but this I have to pin. So because I want the pins to push deep into the edge of the block so that I have a rim around the hat. So keep pulling and stretching all the time. Stretch the wool fabric as well as the buckram, and again put in as many pins as you're able. Another good thing about T-pins is I find them easier to handle and push in and easier to pull out. I found blocking pins can break and then you're stuck with the head of the pin in your hand and the body of the pin stuck in the block. So push the fabric in and around as you go so that it's all neat and tidy, with no folds, loops, pleats, etc. As I say, this is a small button block. They can be bought for about £50 from various block makers. You might be lucky and have a suitable bowl or something similar that you could use in your home if you're not able to purchase blocks yet. Normally I would speed this part of the video up, but I feel it's good for you to be able to see how many pins and how much you have to stretch and pull in, and sometimes reposition the pins as well. Right, once you feel you've got enough pins in and it's all secure and not going to spring apart, we're going to put this aside and it's going to need to dry at least overnight. There we are. So all the pins are in. I push it into the groove. Check I don't need any more pins. Now it's ready to leave to dry. Once the hat has dried overnight, and you've felt it and it really is dry, pull out all the pins. They'll be quite stiff because obviously the buckram will have got very stiff by now. So pull all the pins out, and then we're going to have to force the hat off the block, which can be a bit difficult on a small block like this, as you'll see. Lift up the edges Don't worry that you think you're going to destroy the shape. It will spring back. But pull up the edges all the way around until at least you can get a finger underneath to pull the block out. This can take a while and can be quite tricky. Pull it up as far as you can and then get your hands underneath so that you can pull the wooden block out. There we are. Once you do, you can push the fabric back down again and you'll see it goes roughly back into shape again. Now we've got to trim it. Looks okay from that side, but this side very messy. So I'm going to trim to the point where my pins were actually pinning the fabric to the block. So trim all the way around. Again, this is quite different. Normally I'd use a smaller pair of very sharp scissors for this, but I didn't have them to hand at this point. So I'm using my dressmaker scissors, which aren't ideal. Can be quite tough to get through where you've folded the buckram over. So go all the way around, cutting off the loose and making sure you haven't cut too close to the edge of the hat. So there we have it. It's trimmed and dry, and you can just finish off any little bits you see. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to take our piece of millinery petersham or grosgrain and we're going to iron it into a circle. So have the iron on steam and swirl the petersham and drag the iron round at the same time. Now the good thing is if you end up getting a pleat or a bit of a fold, you can iron that out again and start again. So pull and stretch and iron round. You want to get as tight a circle as you can because this is a very small hat, and so you want for it to look neat. So once you've swirled your buckram, we shall be ready to stitch it in place like that. Now what I've done is I've threaded a needle with extra strong thread, but only a single thread, not doubled over. You will need to stitch very small stitches every 1/4 inch or so all the way around, just catching the top of the petersham and then through the fabric and the buckram if need be. Now this takes quite a long time to do, so I'm not going to show you that. Right, so it's all stitched in place, all neat and tidy. I can barely see the stitching, which is good. But you'll see the hat is slightly deformed where I've been handling it. I'm just going to push my circle of lining inside the hat. It doesn't need fixing in place because once the hat is all fully put together, the lining can't go anywhere. Now I'm going to get a steam iron and I'm going to steam the top there with the petersham. So steam it quite well and we're going to reshape it. Now I'm going to put it on a smaller block. You could use a little bowl or a mug or anything that would fit roughly inside the button hat. So it goes onto there and is left to dry. Once it's dried, you'll see it's pushed everything nicely into place, and I've also put my label inside. Now I'm going to add the elastic. I've taken a very large-eyed needle and threaded it with elastic. I come up one side, halfway around the hat. Then when I've come through, I tie a knot in the end. I do an underhand and an overhand knot. Pull that right through. Then I'm going through the other side and I'll do the same again. Make sure you test, is the elastic long enough or too short or whatever. Put it on your head and just judge roughly where you need it to be. Then again, tie a knot in the other side. The good thing about knots is you can undo them to make it shorter or make it longer if you leave a little bit of leeway. So, there you have it. The elastic, the buckram, everything's done, apart from the decoration. So, as I said, I've decided to use feathers. Now, I'm very lucky in that a friend gives me the pheasant feathers from her land. Now, this one's too long, so I'm going to put that to one side. Now, feathers either go in a left or right-hand curve, exactly the way they do on the bird. They're either on the left or the right-hand side of the body. So you should sort through and decide which you want. Do you want some that curve to the left or some that curve to the right? You can have a mixture, but it's good to know what they are, because if you want to do any manipulation with them, you can't make them go in the opposite direction to the way they are formed. So I think I've made a decision here on what I'm going to use. As I said before, it's not a large hat, so I'm going to use some fairly small pheasant feathers for this. What I'm going to do is just trim all the rough, shaggy feathers off the ends of the spine. Make them a bit easier to work with. And the same with this one. And I've noticed the end of this one's a bit jagged, so I'm actually going to trim it. I've decided to use a rotary cutter for that, so I'm just trimming it. Give it a neat edge. Now comes my curling tongs. I'm going to put my end of the feather in the curling tong and bend round. Again, you have to go in the direction of the feather. You can't bend it the other way. So bend it all the way around the curling tong. I want quite a dramatic effect. I shall hold it there for a moment or two. And there we have it. I'm going to do the other long feather in exactly the same way. There are lots of things you can do with feathers, and I am going to do a video just dealing with feather work and things like that. So if you subscribe, you'll be able to see it. Now I think I'm going to use these two shorter feathers at the bottom in the middle here. So I'll get rid of the others. And for these, I just want a slight curve, so I'm not going to bend them round the curling tongs. I'm going to strip off the fluffy bottoms again. And I'm just going to run them quickly through the curling tong just to give them a very slight curve, as you can see. Now we're going to join them together, and what I've got is a needle and thread, and this is a double thread knotted at the end. I'm going to try and put the feathers together in my hand in roughly a pleasing look. I'll alter them as I go. Not happy with that one in the front, I think, so I'm going to move them about and put that one to the back. Then taking the needle and thread, I wrap it round, put the needle through the end of the thread so it's noose-like, and then pull it tight. And I fiddle with the feathers a bit more, and I'm going to wrap round again with the thread. And then I'm going to stitch through the middle of the spines of the feathers, just to keep them all together. It's normally fairly easy to stitch through them. I've decided to use 2 gold tone jewellery mounts for my feathers. I think they call these end caps or something. I'm not really sure. I don't know where I got them from. I think you can get them on eBay, but I'm not exactly sure what they're called because I just seem to acquire things. So I'm opening one out. It's much too small to use with these feathers, so I'm opening it out and flattening it so that I can fit the feathers in it. I'm trying to trim the ends of the feathers so that they'll fit in. Now I must admit, normally I don't like using glue and a hot glue gun, but with this type of work I really don't have an alternative. So I'm going to put some glue onto the base of the feathers and then push them into the gold tone mount. And it's obvious I haven't trimmed the feathers enough, so I'll push the mount a bit further up and trim the feathers. I'm also adding some little partridge feathers just to the front for a little bit of added interest. And then I shall be using the other gold tone mount, flattened out, to put on the back, because I want it all to look nice from all sides of the hat. So you may decide you don't want to put feathers on and you want to put a Harris tweed bow or something else, or it depends what fabric you're using, but the feathers go well with the hunting, shooting, fishing sort of aspect of Harris tweed hats. So I put the other gold tone mount on the back and I'll squeeze them and flatten them and squish them so that everything's all held in place. And now I'm going to sew it to the top of the hat. I've got extra strong thread again, double threaded with a knot in the bottom. I've taken the lining out because I want to stitch through and I want to put the lining in afterwards to hide the stitching. So stitching from underneath the hat, I will stitch it until it's firmly in place. You don't want it to move about on the hat or twist. So there we have it, it's stitched in place and the hat is finished. I hope you've enjoyed this tutorial and I hope you'll subscribe to the channel and see more of my tutorials. Thank you very much. Goodbye.